Stay tuned for urban legends to ghostly tales of the paranormal, because now it's time for
Message on the Wall.
This is Message on the Wall and the trial of Lizzie Borden. This story begins and ends in Fall River, Massachusetts, where Lizzie Andrew Borden was born on July the 19th in the year 1860. We would probably never have heard of her if it wasn't for the death of her father and stepmother, leading to her being charged with their murders. But more than that was that she was acquitted, leading to speculation for over a century as to who did murder Andrew Borden and his second wife, Abby Defee Gray Borden. Lizzie was the youngest child of Andrew and Sarah Borden, with a second child, Alice, dying at 2 years old, 2 years before Lizzie was born. Andrew Borden was a self-made man, with his wealth coming through the textile industry. His financial struggles through his early years may have taken their toll, for he was not known for his generosity when it came to money, that when he died he was worth over $500,000. The house where the Borden family lived was within walking distance of the bank and Andrew Borden's businesses, having no indoor plumbing to speak of, while other affluent families lived in a more fashionable area known as the Hills. When Lizzie's mother died, it would have been difficult for her to remember her, being just over 2 years old, but her 11-year-old sister Emma took her mother's place looking after baby Lizzie. It was only 3 years after his wife's death that Andrew Borden remarried. Although Lizzie anchored for a more social life, like people on the hill, her father refused to move. Lizzie involved herself in the church, teaching Sunday school and being part of its social movements. Andrew Borden may have been tight with his money where his daughters were concerned, but willingly gave to Abby's family that it caused arguments, leading to both Emma and Lizzie refusing to call Abby Borden mother, reverting to calling her Mrs. Borden. Tensions became so strained that they were allowed to go on vacation. In July 1892, Emma went to stay with friends while Lizzie remained behind. Neither Emma nor Lizzie often ate with their parents, and so when Andrew and Abby suffered a bout of sickness, which could have been food poisoning, it didn't affect Lizzie or their maid, Bridget, so badly, though Abby Borden was suspicious, telling a doctor that she thought they had been poisoned. It was on a Thursday morning on August the 4th, 1892, that Andrew and Abby Borden were savagely murdered in their home at number 92 2nd Street. Lizzie didn't exactly act the way one would be expected to on finding her father hacked to death, but then how is someone supposed to react? Screaming and shouting with uncontrolled weeping, or being so numbed to the core that shock gives the inability to show any emotion. There was little evidence to say who had committed such a crime, for there was no sign of a break-in, and even the head of a hatchet found in the basement couldn't be said for definite to be the murder weapon. But more evidence was garnered against Lizzie, and in June the following year she was brought to trial, accused of the murder of her father and stepmother. The prosecution had a difficult case. Lizzie was the most likely suspect. She had no alibi, whereas her sister was 15 miles away. Apart from Andrew and Abby, the only other two people known to be in the house were Lizzie and the maid, Bridget Sullivan. The trial began on June the 5th, 1893, taking place at the Superior Court in the county of Bristol, with the first day being taken up with swearing in a jury in the trial of the Commonwealth versus Lizzie Andrew Borden. The prosecution attempted to show that Lizzie had opportunity and the motive to commit murder. Evidence wasn't collected for several days after the murders, including a dress that Lizzie said she had been wearing that morning, with no witnesses remembering what the dress looked like. They brought into evidence that Lizzie had burnt a dress after the murders that she said was stained with paint, inferring that it could just as well have been stained with blood. In their opening statements, they covered Lizzie's story that changed from person to person, as well as the illness that struck Mr. and Mrs. Borden, along with Lizzie in a milder form, and the maid feeling ill on the morning of the murders, with the damning evidence that Lizzie had attempted to buy prussic acid for what she said was to clean a sealskin coat, though no examination of Andrew and Abby Borden's stomach contents revealed no sign of poison. Although a number of axes and hatchets that had been found at the Borden home were presented in court, scientific examinations had found no trace of blood, meaning the prosecution couldn't produce a murder weapon. It may neither have gone down too well with the jury that despite having photographs, diagrams and model casts of the victims' skulls, the actual skulls of Andrew and Abby Borden were presented as exhibits. Lizzie had the best counsel money could buy, who in cross-examining witnesses referred to the assailant as male, with the witnesses answering with he, him and his. Many of the witnesses, some coming forward long after the murders, had difficulty with the English language, that at least 2 of them required interpreters. The defence attempted to bring a witness with the strangest story. A French-speaking farmer, Joseph Lemay, who lived some miles outside of Fall River at Steep Brook, told how 12 days after the murders he was passing by a wood next to his property when he saw a young man who appeared distressed. Claiming to hear the man say, "Poor Mrs. Borden," 3 times, Lemay spoke in French to the man who appeared not to have seen him. Speaking to him a second time, the man jumped to his feet, taking a defensive stand. Lemay did the same, holding his own axe as he saw the man had a hatchet, and that there was blood on his shirt. The 2 men stood looking at one another for a moment before the man ran off into the woods. Lemay said he immediately contacted the police with what he had seen, and though he was sworn in as a witness during the trial, he gave no evidence, as the counsel for the Commonwealth objected. The jury and Lizzie Borden were removed from the court, while both sides argued their reasons to the 3 judges overseeing the trial, who decided that such evidence should be excluded, as the account took place 4 miles from the scene and several days after. The trial took 13 days, where Lizzie had several fainting spells that among some elicited their sympathy. When she was first arrested, public opinion was not in her favour until it came to the trial. She didn't take the stand, but the defence more or less produced several character witnesses, and the prosecution did the Borden sisters the favour of showing without doubt that Abby was murdered up to an hour before Andrew. For a man of ageing years, who had money and investments, it's impossible to think that he would not have drawn up a will, but none was found. And because Abby was shown to have died first, all her estate went to her husband, and his death meant that the 2 daughters inherited, cutting out Abby's family, who Emma and Lizzie thought were trying to get their hands on their father's money. At the end of a trial, the last word goes to the judge, who instructs the jury, in this case it being Mr. Justice Dewey. He summed up the evidence, weighing in favour of a not guilty verdict, and after retiring for 1 hour and 8 minutes, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. With their father's money, Lizzie and Emma bought a house on the hill that Lizzie named Maplecroft. Lizzie had finally got what she wanted, living among the affluent in all the comfort that the house on 2nd Street did not have. But Lizzie soon found that though a court of law didn't find her guilty, The people of Fall River were not so obliging. She was shunned by the church and people she thought were friends. Maplecroft even became somewhat of a tourist attraction, with those curious enough hoping to catch a glimpse of a murderess. Parents told their children to stay away from her, and a rhyme that is still chanted to this day began to circulate.
Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 40 whacks.
Though the rhyme is far more macabre, as Abby Borden was found to have been struck 18 times, and Andrew Borden 11. Emma and Lizzie lived in the 13-room house at 306 French Street, where Lizzie, having heard the rhyme many times, changed her name to Lisbeth. With the local society shunning her, Lizzie would travel to Boston and New York, where even there her notoriety followed her. She mingled among the theatre set in an era when actors were thought of as lower class. It was in 1904 that Lizzie met a rather handsome actress named Nance O'Neill, who was said to be 6 foot tall, though it didn't hamper her career as she received reviews in Australia and London. It was shortly after Nance O'Neill moved into Maplecroft that Emma moved out. No one knows the reason, but there was speculation that it was due to Lizzie and Nance having an affair. Nance tended to live beyond her means, and Lizzie paid off her debts while they enjoyed a social life, holding lavish parties, but the friendship only lasted 2 years, with varying stories of Nance tiring of Lizzie, to Lizzie finally refusing to pay any more of Nance's bills. Andrew Borden was placed between his first and second wives, with his and Abby's heads being interred separately to the bodies that had been buried before the trial. Lizzie followed them to the grave almost 35 years later, and abiding by her wishes was buried at the feet of her father. Emma quickly followed, dying only 9 days after Lizzie due to a fall at her home in New Hampshire. She was brought back to Fall River and interred with her family at Oak Grove Cemetery. In 2012, the house where Lizzie lived out her life went up for sale, with a price double to other houses in the area due to its notorious occupant. No one knows if Lizzie haunts the place where she lived for the last 33 years of her life, but those who believe in the hereafter speculate that she must. However, 92 2nd Street certainly has gained a reputation for being haunted. It came into joint ownership between Emma and Lizzie, who rented it out until 1918, when it was put up for sale. After several owners, the house was opened up for people to finally get a look at one of the most gruesome murder scenes in American history. It was in 1996 that it became the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, as well as a museum, capturing the feel of the place as it was when the Borden family resided there, and it's claimed that Andrew and Lizzie Borden never left. Many have had strange experiences, from guests to staff, with the room where Abby Borden was murdered being one of the most active places in the house. You've been listening to Message on the Wall, brought to you by Paranormal X, your website for everything paranormal at www.paranormalx.yolasite.com.